What is going on, my friends? Glad you're here. Thanks for checking out the video. If you're new here, appreciate you clicking on the thumbnail. If you're a returning viewer, it's good to see you. You guys look fantastic today. You know what else looks fantastic? Taito games on the NES. That is right, we are ranking every single United States released Taito game today, and we are starting with one of my all-time favorites, Arkanoid.
For a lot of folks, Brick Breakers for them started on the 2600 with Breakout, and for me, that's not the case. I actually started off with Arkanoid on the NES. I remember renting it, and I was able to get the paddle controller with it when I rented it, and it was just an incredible experience. It absolutely captivated my mind. Brick Breakers, for me, are one of my favorite genres of video games. They're straightforward, simple, and fun, and that's exactly what this game executes on. I'm not going to say it's perfect. There's definitely things lacking here for a lot of people, myself included. Like, at the end of the day, it is just a Brick Breaker, and it doesn't hold my imagination for as long as it used to. But I do think it's a great title, and it's one of my favorites on the NES. I am going to give Arkanoid an A. Man, Bubble Bobble was another regular rental for me when I was younger. I loved this game. And this isn't something I ever played in the arcades. I only ever played this on the NES. So my entire exposure to Bub and Bob and their first game was sitting on my NES in my home in Fall River, Massachusetts, playing this game with my mom. It's a brilliant one-player game. It's somehow better two-player. It's a very challenging puzzle platformer where the puzzle isn't so much in solving anything, it's trying to make sure that you're positioning and lining yourself up correctly to be able to capture the enemies with your bubbles, as well as making sure that if you aren't able to capture them all in cadence that's going to prevent you from having to get attacked, you're able to dodge when they pick up pace and attack you. Bubble Bobble is such a great game, and it led to just a wonderful franchise of games between the Bubble Bobble universe as well as Puzzle Bobble, which is my personal favorite. But Bubble Bobble itself, the first game on the NES, I'm going to give an A. It's really close to perfect, but it doesn't show its age terribly well. It's a damn fine game, it's just not quite perfect. I thoroughly enjoy Bubble Bobble Part 2. I don't think it's as strong of a game as Part 1 in its design or anything like that. It doesn't do anything that's exceptional or take any risks, but what it does really well is it kind of cleans up a lot of the messes the first one had, and it improves in key areas while kind of dropping the ball in others. It's a really interesting title. I enjoy the level designs. I like the mix of enemies. The music is spectacular, and that kind of goes without saying in everything Taito does. The music is great, but where the game kind of falls is that it feels easier to me. Like, the enemies aren't as aggressive as they were in the first one, and because of that, the challenge is a little bit lost in the mix there, which I just don't really dig as much for some reason. It just doesn't connect with me as much as the first one does. It's by no means a bad game. I'm going to give it a B. It's decidedly above average, but it just doesn't quite live up to the A that the first one set out. Let's talk about Demon Sword. And in that matter, we're going to be talking a little bit about The Legend of Kage as well, but Demon Sword to me, boy, this game just feels like it was something that latched onto a mechanic that was developed in a significantly better game and did nothing with it whatsoever. I did not like this game. I don't think it's a failure game, I just don't think it was terribly well designed. I'm usually not a big fan of using the up button on the D-pad to be used as a jump, but I understand that that's what was used in Kage, so it's implemented here as well. It's just not as good. It's a very loose game. The controls are a little bit confusing. I don't really know exactly what I'm supposed to do, and maybe that's just a case of not having a manual, but I don't know. It just did not work for me. Like I said, not a failure point, but to me, this is a D. And if this is a game you really dig, I'm sorry, but sell it to me. Tell me why I should enjoy it. It didn't work for me. Dungeon Magic Sword of the Elements is a really ambitious idea with, I don't want to say bad execution, but perhaps delusions of grandeur in its execution, because this feels like it was setting out to be the next great RPG. And the design work in it feels a little bit like The Bard's Tale, or a little bit like Eye of the Beholder, and what that's not necessarily a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. The execution on the NES is just not great. It's very slow. It's very methodical. It's very plotting. And it's just not an enjoyable experience. Everything works the way it's supposed to. You fall right into the game. You understand what you're supposed to do. It's just, why would you want to do it? Because it's not fun. I'm giving Dungeon Magic Sword of the Elements a D. Again, it works, so it's not going to be a failure point, and it doesn't completely disconnect me from the experience. There were parts of the game that I looked at and I said, well, that's actually a pretty good idea. I just wish it had executed a little bit better. So, not an F, but it's going to be a D. Straight up, I love elevator action. This was one of the first games I owned on my NES, and it was something that I played constantly at my friend Yusuf's house. It was one that I just really loved, and I can look at it, even though I loved it, and I still do love it, but I can look at it with honest eyes and tell you, this is not a great execution of the elevator action from the arcades. I mean, it gets the point across, don't get me wrong, but it's a little bit slow. The music's kind of annoying. The sound effects pretty much suck, and yeah, it's just, when I say a game is methodical in its pacing, that really, elevator action really falls into that, because the game is just glacially slow at times. Like, it's a game about waiting for elevators sometimes. And boy howdy, isn't that what everybody wants to do when they're playing a video game. Now, that said, I still love it. I still play it regularly. It's still something that I enjoy. But if I'm being realistic, this game's a bit of a dog. I think it's average. I think this is a very middle-of-the-road title. You either love it or you hate it. I think that makes elevator action a C. Oh, I do love my licensed video games, and this one is no different. This is the Flintstones, The Rescue of Dino and Hoppy, and as a longtime fan of the Flintstones, I didn't actually know there were Flintstones games on the NES until decades after I had stopped playing on my NES regularly. And that's a shame, because this one's really fun. It's certainly not perfect. There's some questionable physics judgments in the game, and there's some challenging aspects of it that I look at and I go, that seems a little bit much for a Flintstones game, but overall, I actually think this is a really solid title. I think this shows kind of the strength of what Taito was able to do with a lot of stuff, and I think it feels kind of like what a Flintstones game should feel like. It's decidedly not Fred going to work or anything like that, which thank God for that, or bowling or anything, but it is a fun game, and you get the experience of being in Bedrock. I'm giving the Flintstones The Rescue of Dino and Hoppy a B. While I certainly wouldn't want to take away from anyone that is a collector to complete a platform, I think if we were having video game quality influence prices on a video game, the Flintstones Surprise the Dinosaur Peak would not sell for nearly $2,700 complete in box. Now, I understand that it sells that way because this is a rental exclusive. It is almost impossible to find the cardboard. I get all of that. All of that is understood easily, but when I stop and think about it, and I look at this game when I compare it to the other Flintstones game on the NES, this is the same exact experience. The mechanics don't shift. It's a fine game, don't get me wrong, and it's just like the other Flintstones game. It's above average, but I wouldn't be caught dead spending $1,400, $1,500 on a loose cartridge for this game because I just wouldn't get the enjoyment out of it. I'm going to give the Flintstones Surprise at Dinosaur Peak a B, just like I gave the other Flintstones game, because it's basically the same thing. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is one of my all-time favorite films. I love Indiana Jones. I straight up love the series. I love the film franchise. I very, very badly wanted to love this game. I remember when this game released, begging my mother for it, and getting this game and being so utterly disappointed because it is truly horrific. I try to not give a game an F if it's just something I don't like, but I don't know of anybody out there that does like this game. The music is good. I can give you that. And actually, I can't even give you that. The music is okay. This legitimately has some of the worst controls I've ever experienced in an NES game. The AI from the enemies is either Mensa-level genius or some of the dumbest I've ever seen in my life. This is just honestly one of the worst games I've ever played. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade gets an F. It's astonishing to me that we've only had like 7 iterations of Jetsons video games throughout our history in gaming. Now, I'm not saying that the Jetsons are like fertile ground or anything like that, but they seem naturally suited to be video game fodder to me. So it makes me happy that the game that released on the NES, the Jetsons Cogswell's Caper, is actually a pretty strong title. It plays and feels a lot like the Flintstone games, which shouldn't surprise anyone. It's a Hanna-Barbera game developed by Taito, featuring classic characters from 1960s television sitcom animated series. But it's a really solid game. You know, it's really fun. I'm not going to tell anyone here that it's a perfect game or that it's like wildly above average or some kind of crazy hidden gem, but if you're looking for a fun platformer that stars a familiar pop culture character, you could do a lot worse than Jetsons Cogswell's Caper. Now, as far as a rating goes, it's up there. I really enjoyed my time with this one. I'm going to give it a B, just like the Flintstone games, but I don't think if you're looking for something fun to play, you'd be disappointed checking this one out. Not gonna lie to you, when I first heard about the game Kickmaster, I thought it was fake because it's called Kickmaster. And it's a Metroidvania where you kick people. Like, I don't know what was going on in 1991 and 1992 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, but we got Shatterhand and Kick Puncher back to back. And not Kick Puncher, that's a bit from Community.
I am Kick Puncher. My cyber punches have the power of kicks.
Kickmaster. I don't know why we got those in back-to-back years, but yeah, we got ones where you were just forced to either use your fist or use your feet, and they were both brilliant because Kickmaster rules. Oh my god, this game is so good. It's an excellently designed title. It's a ridiculous concept by no stretch of the imagination would anyone ever argue that, but the game itself is really fun. I thoroughly enjoy it. It has fantastic level designs, a gorgeous look for the graphics, fun music, and really clever combat. I also don't know why everything is so expensive that Taito made on the NES, but loose, this is a $104 game right now on price charting, but dare I say it, I think it's worth it. I'm giving Kickmaster an A. This was my first time playing Kiwi Craze, and I am legitimately upset that it took me this long to play this game because this game is magnificent. I don't usually go for games that have one-hit deaths. Those aren't usually my thing, but this one just works. Like, the design of the game is fantastic. The levels are massive. Your protagonist, Kiwi, is adorable. It's just really, really well designed. I like that you have to think ahead and you really need to plot your way through the level to get to the end, rather than just kind of wing it, for lack of a better term, which is ironic since kiwis can't fly, I think. If kiwis can fly, let me know in the comments down below. But I really dig this game. Kiwi Craze, otherwise known as the New Zealand Story on other platforms, is a brilliant title. It's a lot of fun to play, and I think it's the type of game that is just so naturally suited for the NES that it just works. I'm giving Kiwi Craze an A. I was almost going to say B, but I really, really enjoyed my time playing it, and I could see this being released today and being a hit. Alright, time to talk about The Legend of Kage, because everything I said about Demon's Sword kind of applies here, but Legend of Kage actually seems to work for the most part. Like, the jumping feels more natural, the pacing is a little bit better, it doesn't feel, ironically, quite as floaty, even though like the entire game is based around jumping and floating like you would have seen in crazy anime or in martial arts films back in the 70s and 80s. But the game itself is, I mean, I don't know if this is just me not having played it a lot until recently for this video, but to me it just feels pretty average. Like, it was made in 85, so I'm not expecting like a groundbreaking experience here or something that's, you know, transcendent based on time or anything like that. It just feels average. So as much as I appreciate Legend of Kage, and as much as I think it's better than Demon's Sword, I think it is just an average game. I'm going to give Legend of Kage a C.
All right, folks, halfway through the countdown, let's stop and see where we're at.
All right, let's talk about one of the most legendary NES games ever. And unfortunately, I think this one gets listed kind of as a legendary game because of its rarity and how expensive it is. This is, of course, Little Samson. Now, straight up, this is being emulated. I do not own Little Samson, but I have played it numerous times via emulator. Loose, this game goes for $2,400, complete in box $4,300, brand new $17,000. It's worth more than my car. And I'm going to be honest with you, I was really tempted to just kind of brush this one off and say, oh, it's just hype, but Little Samson is a legit game. The mechanics of the title make you think of Mega Man, but the ability to hot swap as you're playing between the different characters who all have different abilities and different move speeds and different actions that they're able to perform really gives it something charming. And the graphics in the game look great, the music is fun, the actual combat is really well designed. Like, I have zero complaints about this game, and this is one of the few that legit lives up to the hype around it. Now, do I think it's a $2,400 video game loose? No, I don't think any video game is a $2,400 game loose, but I think The Legend of Little Samson needs to expand from it being this ultra-rare game that is just a late release that is so pumped up in value because of that, to really be appreciated for how good of a quality it is. Little Samson gets an S. Operation Wolf is a tale of two experiences. One of the single greatest arcade experiences you can ever have is decidedly less than on the NES. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad game by any stretch. Don't get me wrong here, but I played Operation Wolf first in the arcades. Being able to play it on the NES was something I was excited about, and it just didn't land for me. I do think it's a well-designed title, and you get a lot of the same beats that you got from the arcade release, but as far as it being great or really well implemented, I don't think it sticks the landing. And it's just not something like, even when I was younger and I would rent it, it was just always kind of like, oh man, I'd really rather play this in the arcades. It's a fine game. It's okay. It's an average experience overall on the NES. I think I'm going to give Operation Wolf a C, and if you ever get the opportunity to play the arcade version, do so, because that game is incredible. Confession time, I'd never played Panic Restaurant before recording this footage because, kind of like Kickmaster, didn't really realize it was a real game, and maybe that makes me a bad NES fan, but I kind of already moved on by the time this one released. I was already onto the Genesis and the Super Nintendo and kind of left the NES behind, and that's a shame because Panic Restaurant kicks ass. This game is so good. I like any game that involves food. I'm 100% Team Fat Kid, so getting food in a game always makes me happy, and this one has a ton of food that comes alive and tries to kill you. And the gameplay itself is just really well done. It's a truly fun game with some unique level designs, excellent music, fun combat, neat power-ups that are both ridiculous and fun, and everything just connects and works super well. I'm absolutely loving my time with Panic Restaurant. Again, much like Little Samson, totally didn't buy this. I'm absolutely emulating it because I'm not spending the money on an NES game that's expensive, but I'm absolutely enjoying it. Panic Restaurant gets an S. This is one of my greatest regrets from my childhood, is selling my copy of Power Blade, because Power Blade is legitimately one of my favorite NES games of all time. I loved everything about this game, and in a fit of trying to accelerate my adoption of the 16-bit generation, I sold it to get Madden. Yes, that's right. I sold Power Blade for Madden. Now, Madden was great, but Power Blade is significantly better. It is a wonderful platforming adventure game where you collect incredible power-ups, fight with a boomerang, which I love because boomerangs are awesome. The level designs are amazing. The soundtrack is phenomenal. The graphics are great. The boss fights are epic. It does everything right. It is legitimately one of my favorite games of all time, if not in my top 10, easily in my top 20. But definitely one of my favorite NES games. Power Blade gets an S, there's no question about it. When I initially set out to do this ranking video, I said, you know what, Power Blade's going to be an S, and I know it, but I'm going to play it again just to make sure. And I played for like 2.5 hours. It's brilliant. Power Blade 2 is worth significantly more money, but is not nearly as good as the first one. Like, I think there's a lot lost in this sequel that just doesn't fit. It felt forced, the changes that they made. Like tossing in the slide like we saw in Mega Man, just, I didn't like it. I didn't care for the level designs. I didn't think it looked as good. I didn't think it played as good, and it certainly didn't sound as good. Like, with all that said, it's still a fine game. Don't get me wrong, this is a really good title, and if there hadn't been a Power Blade 1, this would be brilliant.
Well, hang on, you've just...
No, I like it. This is brilliant, but I like this.
But instead, I kind of like the original. I enjoy Power Blade 2. Again, don't own it. It's loose $900. I'm happy to emulate it. But I really don't think it lives up to what the first one put out. I'm giving Power Blade 2 a B, edging towards an A, not a B+, though. I'm going to give it a solid B, but I can see why some people love it. It just doesn't click for me. When I looked at the list of titles that Taito released on the NES, I saw Puzznic on the list and fully anticipated thinking, this game's going to suck. Puzzle games and me don't typically get along because I'm not smart enough to do well with them. But I really enjoyed my time with this one. This is a tile matching game where you need to move tiles and have them collide, which removes them from play. And you have to make sure you're doing this either in the correct order or making your timing movements correct. It's just a really well-designed game. Like, I had a lot of fun with this one, significantly more than I anticipated. And that might be inflating the score overall a little bit, just because I fully expected to not like this, and I actually had a lot of fun with it. But it's definitely not a looker of a game. The music wasn't overall very impressive, but the gameplay itself was something I truly enjoyed. I'm giving Puzznic an A. It's time to talk about Kix, which is not a mediocre breakfast cereal. This is a really clever puzzle game. And this is one that I had actually played previously before I played it on the NES release. And I think it's a really solid game. Now, I'm not good at it. I don't have my timing down correctly. And there's certain things that happen in the game that kind of get under my skin and bother me a little bit. But I do think overall this is a really good game. So if you've never played it, the idea is to fill in as much of the board as possible without colliding alongside any of the moving objects on the screen or having the sparks that travel the borders around the level touch your cursor. And you want to get as much covered as possible and create walls so the enemies that you're seeing just bounce off those walls and don't interfere with you. Now, that's 99% of the skill, and I don't have 98% of the 99% skill that you need, so I end up failing miserably in this title, but I do have a lot of fun with it. Now, there are certain things about it, like I said, that I don't like. Sometimes when you respawn, it doesn't move the sparks along, and you'll just instantaneously die repeatedly, which is a little frustrating. It doesn't happen every time, but it happened to me a couple times during my playthrough here. I do think it's a great game, though. Kix is definitely above average. I am going to give it a B. I wanted so badly to like Rainbow Islands because it's part of the I can't say that game. It's part of the Bubble Bobble universe, and as someone who really likes the Bubble Bobble universe, I kind of figured I would like Rainbow Islands. I'd never played it before this playthrough, but honestly, I don't care for this game. Like, it changes too much of the core idea of what Bubble Bobble is for me to really get into it. Now, once you get the hang of it, it becomes significantly easier, but I don't know, I just didn't have fun with this one, and I think that's more on me than it being a bad game. It just doesn't connect for me. Like, it's not something that I look at and I go, ooh, yay, Rainbow Islands. It's kind of like, yay, Rainbow Islands. It's not a bad game.
but I can't say it's a good game either. So I'm going to give Rainbow Islands a C, and feel free to disagree on that one. If this is a game that you love, by all means, let me know why in the comments down below. It just doesn't work for me, but I don't want to take that away from something that you enjoy. Now, I don't want to take anything away from Renegade and its overall importance to video games, because without Renegade, we wouldn't have the beat-em-up genre. But I'm going to be honest with you, the game kind of sucks on the NES. It's not terribly fun. It's very difficult. The controls aren't great. The backgrounds look terrible. The combat isn't wonderful. I don't know. I don't care for Renegade. I do not think it's a very good game on the NES. And again, not taking anything away from the historical nature of how important a title Renegade is, but for me, the NES version of Renegade is a D. This should tell you all you need to know about Sky Shark. I recorded this footage a week ago, and I remember nothing about playing it. It's not that it's bad, it's just unmemorable. It's a forgettable title, and that's almost worse than being bad, is that it's just kind of there. Like, if I could describe Sky Shark in one word, it would be wallflower. It's something that exists, but it's not something I remember anything net positive about. But I also don't remember anything net negative about. It's a shmup. That's all I got. That's all I remember. I do like the overall combat, and I do like the overall progression that you make as you play, but it's just a decidedly middle-of-the-road title. It's so very much the definition of what average is. I'm giving Sky Shark a C, not because it's a bad game, but because it just kind of exists. Target Renegade is the sequel to Renegade, a game I already didn't like on the NES. And this is kind of the Dollar Tree version of that and Double Dragon squished together. It's not great. It looks marginally better, I guess, but it's so homogenized and so very much a clone of Double Dragon that it doesn't stand on its own 2 feet and make its own way. It's not good. The combat problems that existed in the first Renegade exist here. The difficulty is somehow ramped up even further with the stupid motorcycles. I cannot get into these games. They are not made for me. It's just that simple. I will say one thing the game does get right, though, is that the soundtrack is pretty fantastic. But when that's your defining feature, that's a problem. It's not a failure point, but it's not something I probably will ever play again. Target Renegade gets a D. Anytime I can play as a caveman turned into a monkey wearing a football helmet that shoots fire out of his mouth is a win for me. I love Toki. I loved the arcade version. I love the remastered version on the Switch. I love the NES version, warts and all. Is this a great game? No, by no means is this a great game. But it is a great game for me. It's something I enjoy. I like the look of the game. I like the style of the game. This is the kind of game that I just got into a lot when I was a kid, and it's something I still enjoy playing today. You get to collect different power-ups, you have to fight enemies, there's fun, like, timing-specific parts of the level where you actually have to move through things so you don't die. It's kind of a collection of signature platforming elements all put into one package. A goofy package with a monkey and a football helmet, but a package I enjoy all the same. Again, it's not a perfect game. It's incredibly difficult, but for me, this is a game I love. I'm giving Toki an A. Okay, Wrath of the Black Manta. There is a lot of stuff that people could point at and say, that's stupid and I hate it, but for me, it just adds to the overall charm of the title. The cutscenes when you grab an enemy and you interrogate them with the awful dialogue and the horrible sprites with the goofy faces, I love. The combat is shinobi perfect. This game just works for me, and this is going to be one I rank really high, that if you weren't right place, right time when Wrath of the Black Manta dropped, you'll look at me like I'm insane, and I completely endorse and understand that. Again, these rankings are my opinion. This is something that I personally feel. If you disagree, that's totally fine. You're not wrong, I'm not right. For me, Wrath of the Black Manta is an amazing game. It's something I have loved for decades. It's something I will continue to love forevermore, even though it is utterly ridiculous.
Wrath of the Black Manta, for me, gets an S.
There you have it, my friends. Every single game Taito released in the United States ranked from S all the way down to F. Let me know in the comments down below if you agree with my rankings, if I'm right on the money, if I'm way off base. And hey, if you're so inclined, there's a link down in the description as well where you can do your own ranking. Maybe make a video out of it. I'd love to see a response. Until next time, folks, I'm Jay. Appreciate you guys stopping by. Remember to play more games, stay square, and take care. I'll talk to you soon.